How's it going, everybody? Welcome to D4. This is the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons. We theorycraft about them, we crunch numbers about them, not with the intent to tell you the right way or the best way to play a character, but to explore one potential way to build and play a character in the hopes of creating something that is both really fun, but also really powerful to play in-game. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on a particular character that you're thinking about playing, then welcome home. This is where you belong. It truly is, and I'm super glad that you're here. So thanks for being here. My name's Colby, and I'll be your host. Really quick, if you're interested in supporting the channel and or having a step-by-step written guide to recreate the build that I do this week and every week, then I would appreciate it if you'd consider joining the channel as a member. There should be a little join button down there somewhere. For $2 a month, you get a little cheat sheet that shows you how to recreate the build as I've done here without having to rewatch the video or take notes. But also it's just a great way to support me and the channel and help me create more and better content. Huge thanks and shout out to my channel members. And if you're not interested or don't feel financially capable of joining the channel as a member, that's totally okay. I'm super glad that you're here anyway. Just liking and watching and subscribing and commenting are all also great ways to support the channel, so thank you. Right, so there's a neat little trick with rogues that not everyone knows about in D&D. I've talked about it and tried to take advantage of it in a few builds in the past, namely the two-character, two-build team-up episodes, the Battery and the Blender, and also the Wolf and the Coyote, but also as a solo build in the Swashbuckler Nova build that I did a few months ago. As a reminder, for those who have already seen those or know about this little trick, rogues can use sneak attack once on a turn, meaning that yes, you can only use it once on your turn, but then also if you can use your reaction, for example, to make a weapon attack with a finesse or ranged weapon, you can use sneak attack again, since reaction attacks are made on someone else's turn, not your own, right? Now, finding ways to build around this little trick has given me many hours of fun and theory crafting. I'm just kind of weird that way. And today, I actually want to present another way to do this, but in a way that is both doable without any help from an ally, but also sustainable. And by sustainable, I mean doable every single turn for at least one entire combat encounter. So arguably, that's just kind of sustainable at a bare minimum. In order to do so, however, we're going to be doing something else with our rogue that not a lot of people realize is possible to do. And that is still be able to apply sneak attack damage, even if we're using strength to make our weapon attacks. See, in order to do sneak attack damage, the rules state that we must either have advantage or be attacking an enemy who is standing next to one of our allies, and that the attack needs to be made with a weapon that is either a ranged weapon or a finesse weapon. Most of us, I think, see that and just kind of assume that our attack needs to be made with dexterity, since ranged and finesse weapons use our dexterity for plus to hit and plus to damage, right? At least I know I used to assume this, actually, a long time ago, but that's not entirely true. For ranged weapons, yes, we use our dexterity modifier, but finesse weapons simply tell us that we can use our dexterity modifier instead of our strength modifier for our plus to hit and plus to damage. And, as we all know, there's a huge difference between can and must, right? So, yes, it is possible to get sneak attack using our strength as our attack stat, so long as the weapon we're using has the finesse property and we're otherwise qualifying, right? This might feel a little weird, but I don't know why it has to. I mean, the weapon itself might just be narrow or maneuverable enough to place it right where you want it in your enemy's back or in between their plates of armor, right? And you being extra strong in order to ram it home with enough force to pierce just the right spot can make a certain amount of sense from a mechanics perspective. Now, of course, your DM may for some reason decide not to allow it, but the rules as they're written don't require you to use dexterity to get sneak attack damage. And for the build that we're going to do today, that's very important. So yes, we're talking a strength-based rogue. And just in case you could use a little extra confirmation on this, Jeremy Crawford himself has confirmed as much on Twitter multiple times actually, if that matters to you. Now, the downside to making a strength-based rogue, of course, is that we're not going to be quite as good at doing all of the things that rogues are supposed to be good at, aside from sneak attack. You're not going to be quite as good at stealth or picking locks or disarming traps, though I think you'll still be decent. But if you do want to really emphasize that role for your party and just be the best that you can be at those things and still get sneak attack off twice per round as often as possible, I will discuss an alternative to the build that I'm doing when we get to level 3, actually, so watch out for that. But as for the rest of us, I proudly present episode 104, the Lurking Berserker? The Berserker? The Berserker. The Berserker Lurker. And a big thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton, as always, for creating some fantastic artwork for the concept that I sent him for the character this week. He's an amazing artist, and I love what he does, and I know that you guys do too, so if you're interested in following him on social media, or even potentially reaching out to him to see if you can commission him to create some art for your character, or your party even, I will, as always, put links in the video description on how to do so. Thanks, Randall. Before we jump into the build, a quick word about Roll for Combat's Kickstarter campaign for their new and fantastic Battle Zoo books, as they are again the sponsor for the video this week. This Kickstarter just launched yesterday as of this recording, and they just actually today, one day later, surpassed their funding goal. That's incredible, and yeah, the project is greenlit and is going to press. Thanks to those of you who backed them to help them get there. And I mean, yeah, by the time this video releases, almost 2 weeks from now, they're going to be way past that funding goal, and well into their stretch goals, I'm sure. So, in case you hadn't heard or you have forgotten, this Roll for Combat Kickstarter consists of 3 books that are fully compatible with both Pathfinder and D&D 5e. The Battle Zoo Bestiary Strange and Unusual book that will have over 150 award-winning monsters, new monster part rules, and more. The Battle Zoo Ancestry's Year of Monsters book, which will include a new race or ancestry usable by both players and as NPCs, released once a month over the calendar year of 2023 for not only monsters, but weapons, dungeons, and more. And then the Pièce de Résistance, the Battle Zoo Eldamon book, which is basically going to let you combine everything you love about collectible pet games like Pokemon with your D&D or Pathfinder or other TTRPG game, including ways to collect, train, evolve, and yes, even battle the Eldamon pets you collect. I wanted to remind everyone about all the fantastic things this Eldamon system is going to bring to your game. First up, including all forms, there are going to be about 240 Eldamon that you'll be able to play with. That's incredible. Next, there is actually going to be what they're calling an Eldadex for each Eldamon, integrated directly into the game and available online as well. That will give you just about everything you're going to need to know for each Eldamon, including name, stats, rarity, what they evolve into, description, etc. And there's even going to be a non-collectible card game included. It's going to be playable as a standalone game, but will also work directly with the books. Super cool if you just want to battle your pets in like a one-off or, casually outside of your D&D campaign, right? All told, there is just a ton of content packed into what Roll for Combat is creating, and I really think you should check it out. The Kickstarter ends August 26th, so you've only got about a couple of weeks left to go back the project, take advantage of all the perks that you get by backing it when it's in Kickstarter stage. So go to eldamon.com, that'll take you to the Kickstarter. I'll put a link in the video description, of course. Give them your support. You will not be disappointed. Huge thanks to Roll for Combat. Congrats on reaching your funding goal, and let's jump into the build. All right, at level 1, for our starting class. Even though we're going to have more rogue levels than anything else by the end of this build, I wanted to start Barbarian here actually for one main reason. If we multiclass into Barbarian later, we don't get medium armor proficiency, and as a character who's not going to be prioritizing dexterity but instead strength, we really want medium armor proficiency to keep our armor class from being too abysmal. So, yes, upon first meeting our character, they hail from a barbarian tribe that I think for me, for this character, might be practitioners of like a meditative silence. I think this tribe might have, as part of its culture or religion or spiritual practice, a fascination with death. Maybe they commune with the dead, striving to enter like a trance-like state of near death themselves as part of their ceremonies. Maybe the act of becoming enraged brings them into this state of communion with death, where they're maybe somehow embracing death, not necessarily in any sort of sinister or evil way, though it could be that too, I suppose. but maybe more as a way to like find peace, like a calm in the raging storm, or like a oneness with the larger world around them, or even like their ancestors who have gone on before them, etc. But yes, there is an affinity for and a fascination, I think, in this barbarian's culture with death. As for our race, I think I'm going to recommend custom lineage here. So yeah, I'm going back to my old ways. The truth is, the main reason for me to choose custom lineage here isn't necessarily for a super important feat, but it's mostly just to start off with an 18 strength. And as such, I think it would be perfectly fine to go another route here for your race if you think it brings more to the table than a really great starting ability score. The new and improved Bugbear would probably be my first pick. Thematically, actually, if for no other reason, since they're both brutish and stealthy, I think it's a perfect fit. But mechanically also, of course, doing some extra damage on your first round of combat is great. Having stealth proficiency and squeezing into small spaces is really cool. And maybe most importantly, having a 10-foot reach on a melee character who might really want to be practicing a little more kind of hit and run tactics than just standing in the front line the whole time. All of these things would be really nice benefits to this character. But yes, I'm going to say custom lineage, and for the free feat that we get as a custom lineage character, I would take the Piercer feat, mostly because it's a half feat that would let us add 1 to our strength, but it also does add a little bit more to our sustained DPR, damage per round. Admittedly, it's not an amazing increase. I don't love the Piercer feat unless you're sort of building specifically for kind of a crit fisher, but as a reminder, with the Piercer feat, once per turn, when we do piercing damage, we can re-roll 1 of the attack's damage dice. And it doesn't have to be a 1 or a 2, though that's probably the only thing we should re-roll. But then we have to use the new roll, of course. It's not going to do a ton for our damage, but it'll come in handy once in a while, so long as we're using a weapon that does piercing damage, right? Also, with Piercer, getting a critical hit with piercing damage lets us roll 1 additional die for the weapon damage on that critical. So instead of 2, it's 3, right? Again, nothing huge, but a small bump. We'll take it. As for our ability scores, I'm going to recommend going with the point buy system as always, and would say we start with a 15 strength, taking our +2 from custom lineage there and a +1 from Piercer. So we've got an 18 to start. That's awesome. And then going 14 constitution and 14 dexterity. As for our equipment, I recommend the gold buy method as usual, and say we buy some scale mail, a shield, and a rapier. Since, of course, rapiers have the finesse property and do piercing damage. As a barbarian at level 1 then, we do get the unarmed defense feature, but as usual, it's a trap. It lets us add our constitution and dexterity modifier to our armor class if we're unarmored. That would give us a 14, but of course the scale mail is a 14 plus our dexterity modifier, so we'd be at a 16 plus our shield, 18, and that's not bad for a level 1 character who's a barbarian. That's especially nice because, of course, as a barbarian, we also get rage, which tells us, as a reminder, that twice per short rest for now, as a bonus action, we can enter a state of rage. It lasts for 1 minute. It gives us some nice little perks. We get to do 2 more damage per attack, so long as we're making our attacks with strength, and we're not wearing heavy armor. We have advantage on strength checks and saving throws, so that's great for grappling, shoving, etc. And maybe most importantly, I think, we get resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, which, as I always remind people, is going to be the majority of damage that you're going to be taking in-game. So that's a really nice survivability benefit. Of course, our rage ends early if we don't make an attack or take damage in a round, and it prohibits us from casting or concentrating on spells. So some big drawbacks, some big benefits. For this character, it's awesome. At level 2, you could totally just start taking rogue levels now, if you really wanted to. But the thing with barbarians is they're just so front-loaded with really awesome features that once you start taking levels in barbarian, it's kind of hard to stop. They are the addictive drug of D&D. At least once you get to like level 5 or 6, and after that it's kind of hard to keep taking levels in Barbarian since they scale so poorly, in my opinion. Anyway, we're going to stick with Barbarian for a bit, because mostly at this level, level 2, you get Reckless Attack, and Reckless Attack is just so good. It tells us that, again, when you're not wearing heavy armor, and so long as you're making attacks with strength, you can choose to attack recklessly, giving you advantage on all attacks that you make this turn. That's particularly important for us, as we will discuss later. The big downside, of course, to reckless attack is that if you decide to attack recklessly, all attacks against you are made with advantage until your next turn. Fortunately, we'll be taking half damage on most of those attacks, assuming we're raging, so that hurts a little bit less. And yeah, I'd plan on using this pretty much all the time. At level 2, Barbarians also get Danger Sense that gives us advantage on dexterity saves against things we can see, and that's really nice. Not quite as good as it would be if we were focusing on dexterity for this character, or had proficiency in dexterity saving throws for that matter, but still, it's nice, we'll take it. At level 3, again, once you start Barbarian, it's hard to stop. We're going to stick with it for a minute because we get a 3rd rage per day, and that's really nice, meaning that most of us are going to be much more likely to have rage available for every combat or almost every combat in a day. You know, unless you have a table that does a lot more combats per day than the average table seems to. But then, of course, we get our Primal Path, our Barbarian subclass, and we are going with, if you couldn't tell by the title, the Berserker. Now, before you flip any tables about the Berserker because it's so terrible, let's just all calm down and stop raging, pun intended, and talk about this choice for a minute. Here's the thing. Getting a weapon attack reliably and consistently using just your bonus action is actually really hard to come by in D&D 5e without also taking the attack action first. If you're 2-weapon fighting, using Polearm Master or Crossbow Expert, the Monk's Unarmed Strikes, War Cleric's bonus action attack, or some other subclass that gives you the ability to make a weapon attack as a bonus action, with all of those, you have to take the attack action first in order to get that bonus action attack. And as we'll get into in a few minutes, on this character, we very much do not want to take the attack action on our turn, but we do want to use our bonus action to make a weapon attack, at least once we get sneak attack. And as far as I know, the ways that we can actually do this in 5e are very few and far between. One option would be to go Battlemaster Fighter and take the Quick Toss maneuver, which lets us make a thrown weapon attack as a bonus action, no taking the attack action first required. We could, in that scenario, throw a dagger with our bonus action using one of our superiority dice, and Quick Toss, saving our action for something else. And if you want to play this character as a dexterity-based character who really, really excels as like the party's rogue and is stealthy and sneaky and lockpicky and scouty, then this is actually the route I would go for this character. You only get 4 superiority dice per short rest, 5 if you take the superior technique fighting style. So on the one hand, that's arguably less sustainable than the route we're going. But on the other hand, yeah, you do get those superiority dice back on a short rest. So depending on your table, how many combats you tend to have between short rests and between long rests, you might actually be able to pull off the double sneak tactic more frequently than we're going to be able to as a Berserker Barbarian. So it's worth considering. Another way I thought of actually would be to take some sorcerer levels. Get the Quicken Spell meta magic option that lets you cast a spell with your bonus action, right? And then you could quicken the spell Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade, and then you, would get to make a weapon attack as part of the spell, right? Without requiring that you take the attack action first. The big problem here, of course, is that Quicken Spell costs 2 sorcery points, and you only get 1 sorcery point per sorcerer level. So to do this in a way that would be even remotely sustainable, you'd have to take a lot of levels in Sorcerer, and that would be fairly counterproductive to everything else we're trying to accomplish with this build, I think. Anyway, if you can think of other great ways to make a weapon attack using your bonus action without needing to also take the attack action first, let's discuss it in the comments. As for us, yes, we're going Berserker Barbarian. And first off, I want to read what Wizards of the Coast has to say about the Berserker. For some barbarians, rage is a means to an end, that end being violence. The path of the Berserker is a path of untrammeled fury, slick with blood. As you enter the Berserker's rage, you thrill in the chaos of battle, heedless of your own health or well-being. Kind of feels like the barbarian's barbarian, right? But I think, in our case anyway, this path of untrammeled fury will be a silent one. I mean, maybe your eyes are bloodshot and like bulging out of your head, but any screaming that I would do on this character anyway would be silent. So, the main reason that we're going Berserker, of course, is for their Frenzy ability that they get at this level. And it is both great and terrible. With Frenzy, when you rage, you can decide to go into a Frenzy, which lets you make a weapon attack as a bonus action on each of your turns. No, when you take the attack action prerequisite, right? And thus, for us, perfect. There is one teeny weeny, teensy weensy, itty bitty problem, however, and it's that when we do this, we suffer a level of exhaustion every time. Oof. That is a steep penalty, and is the reason why so many argue that this subclass really stinks. In case you need a reminder, exhaustion incurs some pretty stiff penalties, and you can suffer multiple levels of exhaustion, and the penalties that you suffer with each level stack. At level 1 exhaustion, you just have disadvantage on ability checks, which isn't great, but it's not the worst thing ever. At 2 levels of exhaustion, you suffer level 1 and your move speed is halved. And then at level 3, you have disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws, which is pretty much untenable, and it just gets worse from there. The really crappy thing is that your exhaustion levels stick with you until you take a long rest, and even then, they only go down by 1 level with each long rest. So going into a frenzy more than once per day is really not particularly sustainable unless you're a 10th level ranger or you have a friend who's willing to burn a 5th level spell slot and cast greater restoration on you. I'm not going to assume that any of those things are going on here. So that means for all intents and purposes, we can really only frenzy once per day, maybe 2 at the very most if we know that we're going to be getting a long rest or 2 or more immediately after the fight that we're currently in. And that's why I said earlier that even though we would thus benefit from a bonus action weapon attack for an entire combat encounter with Frenzy, the Battlemaster Fighter might be a little more sustainable since they get their superiority dice back on a short rest, right? Regardless, I'm sticking with Berserker here. Just know that the fewer fights per day you tend to have at your table, the more effective this build will actually be damage-wise. All right, at level 4, now that we've got our bonus action attack secured, I think it might be time to dip into Rogue so that we can really start taking advantage of that frenzy. For me, personally, I don't know that I'd necessarily try to justify the multi-classing into Rogue here with a, well, now I started being trained in roguish skills by my rogue friend or whatever. I think I'd just call this part of like the custom class that I'm making here. We take Barbarian levels at one point, we take Rogue levels at one point to create this Deathstalker class that I'm doing. And that's just kind of part of what makes up this character, this class. But if you need to work this out with your DM to justify your multi-classing, then make sure you know ahead of time and talk it over with them and have a plan for doing so, right? But as a rogue at level 1, we get Thieves' Cant, which is kind of the rogue's special coded language that they can use to communicate with others who can read it. And we get Expertise. That lets us take 2 skills that we're proficient in, or 1 skill and our proficiency with Thieves' Tools, and double our proficiency bonus. And again, if you're going to try and function as the party's like scout, rogue, lockpicker, and went with the dexterity-based Battlemaster Fighter version of this build, then I'd definitely go stealth and Thieves' Tools here. But, you know, even with our fairly mediocre dexterity score, being able to double your proficiency bonus in like those 2 really important roguish skills will help you be pretty decent at those things. Understanding that if we have a level of exhaustion, we have disadvantage on our ability checks, right? So we're not going to be great. Will be passable. So yeah, feel free to still try to fill that role for your party, even if you go Barbarian, if there's no one else in your party that can or wants to do those things. Just be sure, one note, that if you are going to try and do this and be your party's scout, I'd probably replace that scale mail with a breastplate as soon as possible, or like some mithril armor if you can find it, so that you don't just always have disadvantage on stealth checks regardless of whether you have exhaustion or not, right? Of course, if you have exhaustion, then the disadvantage doesn't matter because you can't get double disadvantage. Anyway, also as a rogue at level 1, we get Sneak Attack. And just to reiterate, yes, it lets us do additional damage once on a turn. It's 1d6 for now, but it scales every 2 rogue levels. And yes, you need to be attacking with a ranged or finesse weapon, and we are with our rapier. And you need to have advantage on the attack or be attacking an enemy that's standing next to one of our allies. And yeah, thanks to reckless attacks, we will always be attacking with advantage, at least on our turn, and thus can take advantage from sneak attack, and that's great. At level 5, as important as it is for this character to be just pumping sneak attack damage, I think we gain just a little bit more with a couple more levels in Barbarian first. So let's do that before going back to Rogue. Because yeah, at Barbarian 4, we'd get our first ability score, increase our feat, and that would mean we get to bump our strength and cap it right at 20. I want to get our damage as high as possible, as early as possible, and capping strength I think is the best way to do that. Feels great to hit that cap right at level 5. So yeah, we're sitting pretty. At level 6, we would be a Barbarian 5. That means we get fast movement, and that means 10 extra feet of move speed. So long as we're not wearing heavy armor, that will be particularly handy if we have 2 levels of exhaustion, on the rare occasion that we do. And then, yes, of course, we get extra attack, and attacking twice when you take the attack action is going to just do a little bit more for us than an extra d6 of damage from sneak attack, damage-wise. And the fact that we got to cap our strength along the way made it that much better, I think, perfectly justifying these last 2 levels of Barbarian over Rogue. But at level 6, it's time for our first damage report. So let's go over tactics and what I envision combat looking like for this character. On round 1, you would of course rage with your bonus action, making it a frenzied rage if you don't have any levels of exhaustion. Or again, perhaps very occasionally if you only have 1 level of exhaustion and you feel pretty confident that you're going to be getting a couple of days off after this particular combat. You would then make a couple of reckless attacks with your action, right? Adding sneak attack damage to one of them. But on round 2 and on all subsequent rounds, you're going to simply make your bonus action weapon attack granted you from Frenzy. And then instead of taking the attack action, you're simply going to take the ready action. As a reminder, when you take the ready action, you get to act with your reaction between now and your next turn. Now, you have to state what action you're going to take. In our case, it will be take the attack action. Your DM may require you to specify against whom, so discuss that with them. And you also have to specify what thing is going to trigger your ready to attack action. It could be pretty much anything. I think the simplest would be, the trigger is as soon as my turn is over, but that might feel a little too cheesy to your DM, since it would feel essentially like you're just kind of doing everything on your turn for all intents and purposes, just giving up your reaction, which is no small sacrifice. Instead, you might say something like, right before the enemy I'm standing next to moves or takes an action, I'm going to take the attack action against them, or something like that, right? Work it out. Regardless, once the trigger happens, you can take your action, yes, using your reaction. Since using your reaction is here something that happens on another creature's turn, it means that you can apply your sneak attack damage again, as you get to apply it once on a turn, right? Right. Now, we do have one small speed bump here in that, as I mentioned earlier, Reckless Attack gives you advantage on attacks that you make on your turn. And thus, rules as written, attacking with your reaction doesn't technically qualify for this benefit. For the ease of number crunching, I'm just going to assume that you have advantage anyway. Maybe you've managed to convince your DM that the advantage from Reckless Attack should last for an entire round. Maybe you use flanking rules at your table, and you have the enemy flanked like any good rogue would. Maybe another party member has done something to grant you advantage, like cast Fairy Fire on the enemy, or restrained them, or knocked them prone. Maybe you decided to take a feat or a single level wizard dip to get a familiar, and they're giving you advantage, and that doesn't require concentration. If you don't have advantage on your reaction attacks, lower these numbers that I'm about to report on by a little bit, especially at the higher enemy armor classes. But yes, at that point, we would then make 2 attacks with our reaction. Since we're taking the attack action and we have extra attack, we get to take our full attack action, applying sneak attack damage for the second time this round on one of those attacks. Altogether then, including our bonus action attack and our reaction 2 attacks, we'd do 3d8 damage from our rapier plus 2d6 from 2 sneak attacks, plus 11 from our strength modifier plus our rage bonus damage. And thus, against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would do on average 49 damage per round, and against an enemy with a 15 armor class, it would be 45 DPR. And that's really quite solid, putting us at like the top half of tier 1 compared to other sustained DPR builds that I've done to date at this level. Check the video description for links to graphs and spreadsheets showing those comparisons. Of course, there is the caveat that you can really only do this once, maybe twice per day. But I mean, I'd probably say that the majority of my sustained DPR builds kind of fit into that category actually, or at least a very significant portion of them, since I'm often depending on, say, our highest level spell slot being used for concentration on a spell for another sustained DPR character, or otherwise using a limited resource to grant us that high level of damage every single round for at least an entire combat encounter. So yeah, I'm not really losing any sleep here, worrying about how truly sustainable this DPR is. When you can afford to frenzy, you're going to feel super powerful, and I think it's going to be really, really fun. And during the other combat encounters that you might have before your next long rest, you're still going to be a raging barbarian doing some pretty significant damage, including sneak attack. You might, on those encounters, decide to dump your shield and your rapier and instead go 2 short swords so that you can still get a weaponized bonus action, and that will boost your damage a little bit, not a lot, but anyway, have fun with it. At level 7, however, we're going back to Rogue, and I think I would plan on just sticking with Rogue for the rest of this character's career. Again, at this point, the best way to increase our DPR is just going to be to pump that sneak attack damage as high as we can and as fast as we can. That said, I could totally see you potentially going with 3 levels of fighter to get some battle master maneuvers, and then, let you use your double sneak attack tactic more often. I'd probably only do that if I was having a lot of combat encounters per day and I knew I was going to get this character into very end game high level content, and we'd get a fighting style and a little extra damage out of those superiority dice as well. So worth considering. But for me, yeah, I'm just going Rogue from here on out, and that means at Rogue 2 we get Cunning Action, and that lets us use our bonus action to dash, disengage, or hide. That'll be really nice once in a while, especially when we're not frenzied and our bonus action isn't quite so heavily spoken for. At level 8, we'd be a Rogue 3, and first up, our sneak attack goes to 2d6, and then we get our roguish archetype, our rogue subclass. And as is so often the case, unless I'm specifically building a character around a particular rogue subclass, I don't have a super strong recommendation for our roguish archetype here. I've said that a lot before, I just don't really have a favorite, maybe with the exception of the Arcane Trickster, but we're a barbarian, so spells are a little tougher to work with. What I'm going to recommend here won't really add a ton to our sustained DPR until arguably very late in this character's career. But I do really like it for the theme that we've got going here with like this silent rager who comes from a tribe that courts and communes with death. And it is the Phantom. I don't think I've ever used Phantom in a build before, have I? If I have, remind me which build it was in the comments. But let's read what Wizards of the Coast has to say about the Phantom Rogue. Many rogues walk a fine line between life and death, risking their own lives and taking the lives of others. While adventuring on that line, some rogues discover a mystical connection to death itself. These rogues take knowledge from the dead and become immersed in negative energy, eventually becoming like ghosts. Thieves' guilds value them as highly effective information gatherers and spies. Many Shadar-kai of the Shadowfell are masters of these macabre techniques, and some are willing to teach this path. In places like Thay in the Forgotten Realms and Karnath in Eberron, where many necromancers practice their craft, a phantom can become a wizard's confidant and right hand. In temples of gods of death, the phantom might work as an agent to track down those who try to cheat death and to recover knowledge that might otherwise be lost to the grave. How did you discover this grim power? Did you sleep in a graveyard and awaken to your new abilities? Or did you cultivate them in a temple or thieves' guild dedicated to a deity of death? I think we've kind of already answered that question for ourselves, but yeah, I really love the personality that this subclass gives to our Berserker Lurker. But as a Phantom Rogue, here we get a couple of features. Whispers of the Dead is a really nice little ribbon feature. It lets us choose a skill or tool proficiency that you lack and gain it upon finishing a short or long rest, as a ghostly presence shares its knowledge with you. Cool, creepy, useful. And then we also get Wails from the Grave, and this is a nice little way to add damage, but to a second target once in a while. Proficiency bonus times per day. When you deal sneak attack damage on your turn, so again, not with your reaction, you can target a second creature within 30 feet, roll half of your sneak attack dice rounded up, so that's just 1d6 for now, and deal that much necrotic damage to the second target as Wails of the Dead surround them for a moment. Cool, creepy, useful. Not super sustainable, but later on it might be. At level 9, we would be a Rogue 4, and we get another ability score increase or feat. Very uncharacteristically, for me, we've sort of tapped out early on needing our ASIs and feats to increase our damage. I think here I'd probably take the lucky feat. Let's do that. It does give us just a little bit more damage on average, since it gives you 3 luck points per day that you can use to roll an additional d20 when you make an attack, ability, or saving throw roll. It's not advantage, though it feels like it, thus wouldn't let us get to use our sneak attack if we didn't otherwise qualify for it, unless your DM decided that it could count, of course. But a lot of DMs say that they ban the lucky feat at their table, so probably not. The nice thing about it is you get to wait until you've rolled your first die to decide if you want to spend a luck point and roll a second. And you can also use a luck point when a creature makes an attack against you to potentially cause them to miss, or maybe not crit, right? Always handy and potentially a big difference maker in combat. For our level 9 damage report then, the only real increase to our sustained DPR is that extra d6 that we're getting from sneak attack. We have picked up some nice utility and a little extra damage to a second target once in a while thanks to Wails from the Grave, but again, I'm not going to count that as part of our sustained DPR yet. And so, against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would do on average 58 DPR, and against an enemy with a 16 armor class, it would be 54 damage per round on average. So yeah, not a huge increase since last check, though we will see a little bit better scaling going forward. At this point, compared to other sustained DPR builds, we're kind of more like lower tier 1, upper tier 2. Still really solid. At level 10, we would be a rogue 5, our sneak attack goes to 3d6, and we get Uncanny Dodge. This tells us that we can use our reaction to halve the damage of a single attack against us. Of course, we're not going to have our reaction available if we're taking the ready action every turn, but especially if we're not frenzied and a big hit comes in, this will be nice to have. At level 11, we'd be a rogue 6, and we get Expertise Part 2. You know, I'm going to say like pick your favorites here. Having a lot of really great bonuses to a few key skills is something that makes rogues really great, right? If you're acting as the party's scout and lockpicker, I'd maybe go for sleight of hand and perception here, or investigation if you haven't yet. But, you know, otherwise, make sure you pick up probably athletics. I don't know, lots of good options. At level 12, we'd be a rogue 7. Our sneak attack goes to 4d6, and we get evasion. Evasion rules. So now, not only do we have advantage on those dexterity saves thanks to the Barbarian's danger sense, but if it's against a fireball or a trap that would do half damage on a save, we instead take 0 damage on a successful save, and only half even if we fail. You're gonna love this against those enemy fireballs and things, right? At level 13, we'd be a rogue 8, and we get another ability score increase or feat. There are lots of great options to choose from here, but yeah, I'm probably gonna be focusing on utility and or defense above all else. So mobile would let you run away from anyone you make an attack against without provoking an opportunity attack. Really great for hit and run tactics for the non-bugbears among us. It also gives you 10 more feet of move speed. That's really nice. And also with mobile, if you dash, you're not impaired by difficult terrain. I would really consider going that route on this character, I think. But, you know, Resilient Wisdom wouldn't be a bad idea for a very important saving throw. Or even Resilient Dexterity to really make the most of those bolstered dexterity saves that we already have. If you're going to go either of those, I'd be sure to plan ahead and take like an odd numbered ability score at character creation, right? Because you get a +1 when you take Resilient. I mean, just straight bumping our dexterity wouldn't be a bad idea either, I don't think, for utility purposes, as well as initiative, etc. Or even our constitution, for that matter, for better survivability and constitution saving throws. Or even just taking the tough feat if we really want to bolster our survivability. Especially since for us, when we're raging, we'll be taking half damage most of the time, so every hit point for us really means more than it does to the non-barbarians of the world. Anyway, pick your favorite, and let me know actually in the comments if there's a feat in particular here that I haven't mentioned that you think would be really valuable on this character. Oh, also, in before someone mentions Ritual Caster to eventually get the Phantom Steed spell so that you can kill it over and over and eventually hit your trinket quota that we're going to talk about next level, like Treant Monk talked about doing on one of his videos. Time for another damage report at level 13, and once again, the biggest increases to our damage comes from the increase to sneak attack. We've increased it by 2d6 since last check, and yeah, I mean, keep in mind that when we're frenzied at least, that's going to generally mean an extra 4d6 of damage in a round, right? But yeah, we've also picked up some really nice defensive and utility features along the way, so we're feeling pretty happy. And against an enemy with a 10 armor class here, we would do on average 76 DPR, and against an enemy with a 17 armor class, it would be 72 damage per round on average. And that's still super solid, keeping us kind of near the bottom of tier 1 compared to other sustained DPR builds at this level. And we're a pretty decent rogue at this point too, with lots of expertise, a lot of both survivability and utility features under our belt. At level 14, we would be a rogue 9. Our sneak attack goes to 5d6, and we get Tokens of the Departed. This is a really cool, super flavorful, and unique feature, and it's my favorite thing about the Phantom Rogue. It's just too bad that it took us this long to get here. But with Tokens of the Departed, not only does it sound like a great title of a Martin Scorsese film, but when a creature dies within 30 feet of you, you can create a little soul trinket in your hand using your reaction. Yeah, that's kind of a bummer. That means we're often not going to be doing this when we're frenzied anyway. But otherwise, it's a nice little use of our reaction. And as macabre as this sounds, I'm not sure why you couldn't say, like, go down to the pond at the beginning of the day and kill a bunch of frogs or fish or something to stock up on soul trinkets, because we can have a number of soul trinkets equal to our proficiency bonus. There's no minimum challenge rating given for the creature for this to work or anything. I mean, yeah, it is a little dark, but so is this character, right? But then, so long as you have one of those soul trinkets on you, you have advantage on death saving throws and constitution saving throws, and that's kind of huge. What's more, when you deal sneak attack damage on your turn, you can destroy one of those trinkets and use Wails from the Grave without expending a use of your Wails from the Grave, which means that you can potentially have up to 10 uses of Wails from the Grave during a combat encounter, even if you're not using your reaction to create more. And for me, that means you've got enough to get through at least one combat encounter per day. So I'm going to go ahead and add half of your sneak attack damage once per turn when calculating DPR next time, with the understanding that a bit of that total damage is going to be done to a second target, which isn't always the most optimal way to deal damage, but it's still valuable, so I'm going to count it. Finally, you can, with an action, destroy one of your soul trinkets and then ask the spirit who you used to create it a question that it will answer in a language it knew as concisely as possible, though it's under no obligation to be truthful. So that's kind of questionable use. Especially if you used a bunch of fish to create your soul trinkets. But it could be handy once in a while, especially I think if someone in your party can cast like Zone of Truth first, something like that, right? And regardless, it's really cool. At level 15, we would be a Rogue 10, and yeah, at level 10, Rogues get an additional ability score increase or feat unique among character classes. And yeah, I'd probably just go with one of the ones that I mentioned last time, unless you've got a better idea, but still generally shoring up our defenses and or utility, which is not a bad thing. At level 16, we would be a Rogue 11. Our sneak attack goes to 6d6 damage now, and we get reliable talent, and this is actually something that pairs quite nicely with our Berserker selves. With reliable talent, anytime you roll an ability check that lets you add your proficiency bonus, anything you roll less than a 10 just counts as a 10. You will recall that having a level of exhaustion imposes disadvantage on ability checks. So hey, if you've made it this far in this character's career, it will be nice to suffer a much reduced setback from a single level of exhaustion now, especially on those important checks you might be making that you probably have expertise in, like stealth and things like that, right? But finally for us, at level 17, I actually can see taking a 6th level of Barbarian here instead of Rogue 12, which is what I'm going to do, since Barbarian 6 would give us both a 4th Rage per day and the Berserker feature Mindless Rage, which keeps us from being charmed or feared while raging. And that's potentially quite powerful. But yeah, I think I'm going to go Rogue 12 here, mostly under the assumption that we're going to continue on after this level to keep scaling that sneak attack damage. And, hey, we would pick up another ability score increase or feat here, and thus continue to bolster our defenses or utility, again, PYF. But for our final damage report, sticking with the theme here, the biggest increase that we've seen since last check is, yes, another 2d6 of sneak attack damage, which would be 4d6 if we get to do it twice per round, but also a lot more uses of Wails from the Grave, meaning an extra 3d6 of sneak attack damage once on our turn, albeit to a second target. And yes, also lots of nice defensive and utility features to boot. And so against an enemy with a 10 armor class, we would on average do 108 damage per round, and against an enemy with an 18 armor class, it would be 102 DPR. And we have broken the Centennial Barrier, even against that higher 18 armor class. That's fantastic. Meaning that, yeah, we're kind of still in the bottom half of tier 1 compared to other builds at this level, with a whole lot of utility and survivability to boot. And so, final thoughts. The tier score for this character, if you take their average DPR at every armor class that we calculate for at each of the damage reports, is a 67.7, which puts them right smack dab in the middle of tier 1 for sustained DPR. Right between the Holy Warrior from a few weeks ago and the Hexblade Warlock, episode 1. And honestly, that's a lot better than I thought they would be when I first started building this character. Now, of course, we understand that this damage really only happens for 1, maybe in extreme circumstances, 2 combat encounters per day. But that's okay, because it's a freaking amazing level of consistent damage that, we might just want to save for a fight that's going to be especially tough. And otherwise, on all other rounds, we still do really solid damage between reckless attack, 2 or maybe 3 attacks per turn if we drop our shield, lots of sneak attack damage, and a little rage bump. We're in a good place, regardless. Not only that, but yeah, we do bring a lot of roguish utility to our party and some pretty fantastic survivability. I mean, think about it. Resistance to most damage, a decent armor class with medium armor and a shield, evasion, a ton of hit points, advantage on constitution saving throws, and lots of other feats or ability score increases that I didn't really specify that are going to bolster our defenses and utility. This is a pretty dang well-rounded character. And that's not exactly something that I specialize in, but I'm always happy if I can end up there while I'm focusing on bolstering damage along the way, right? In the end, though, I think my favorite thing about this character is like the way that they feel. I imagine them with like a skull painted on their face, signifying their barbarian tribe, as opposed to like the blue and white from Braveheart that's kind of become cliche, right? They've got a great story and like personality and theme, I think. Silently raging, communing with death, both in their own like spiritual or cultural practices, but also because they're just dealing so much damage and death to their foes, all while being really pretty hard to kill themselves and making their party incredibly glad to have them along for the ride. I hope we all get a chance to play it one day, but that is the build for the week. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys know how much I love you, because I do. You're awesome. Thanks for liking and subscribing and all the things that you do to support the channel. I hope that you'll check out the rest of the content that's on the channel in case you're not in the habit of doing so. But more importantly, I hope you have a fantastic day and a really great week, and that you stay safe and are kind and good, and that I see you again really soon. But until then, take care. Bye. Alright, I think I'm ready to go. Squeaky chair and all. I've got Dungeon Master's Guide. Doom, 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 doom. I've got 12-sided die. I got Kitty Pride and Nightcrawler too, waiting there for me. Yes, I do. I do. In the garage, I feel safe. No one cares about my ways. So that you don't, Actually, maybe that doesn't matter. Bless me. In the garage where I belong, no one hears me sing this song. Weezer. The original nerd rock. Can make a certain amount of sense from mechanics. My son likes to play VR in the room immediately below us. And he likes to scream really loud when he does. So yeah, I guess I've just become your angry elderly neighbor that lives in the apartment above you. And I apologize to any of you who get triggered by that. Stop slouching. Meaning that you can potentially have 10 uses of Whales of the Grave. Whales from the grave? Whales from the grave. Well, don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. Well, don't say that. Yet.